Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, we talk about some of the economic things that are going on in the world and some of the impact that may have on you here in Stewart or in Florida, some of the things that you may want to deal with or may want to be aware of, or just, have on the horizon because it's things that, could have an impact on you. And a lot of times we try to talk about different things that are going on. We've talked a little bit about the economic injury disaster loans. We've talked a little bit about the payroll protection program loans. We've talked about some of the aspects of that. We talked about a little bit about the recovery. We've talked about flattening the curve economically versus flattening the curve from a virus standpoint. And we talked a little about statistics. Some of that has had political ramifications. When we're talking about numbers, we've talked a little geometry, and we've talked a little, we've talked a little statistics, like I said, and those are things sometimes people don't really have an opportunity to get exposed to, or don't have an opportunity to be involved in. But so I want to talk about a couple things that are going on right now that concern me economically and socially. So some of this has a political ramification, but how we are economically in our country, whether we're a capitalistic system or a socialistic system, is going to be largely based on politics. It's not going to be based on economics. Let's face it. If you truly look at the economics of a free enterprise capitalistic system versus the economics of a socialist or communist system, you can't compare those two. There is no successful communist or socialist country, particularly of our size, but there's nothing even close to that in the world. So as we all know, economically, it doesn't make sense. So it's strictly going to be political, whether or not enough people can be convinced that getting free stuff from the government works, and that you don't ever have to pay it back. And it's interesting because I'm always amazed that sometimes we make things so complicated. And granted, some things, the process behind it is very, very complicated. And there are little nuances that can send you down rat holes and, all kinds of things, where the next thing you're kind of off on a tangent, right? But ultimately, all of that ends up coming all back, and it all ends up coming, and all of that complication and all of those detours eventually come back to the main road. And the next thing you know, boom, you're faced with the reality of the position that you took. And sometimes that takes minutes, and sometimes that takes millenniums. It takes years. It's just, but ultimately, when you boil it all down, you get what you get. And so a lot of times I like to think about things in my own perspective, because it helps as to my own situation, right? So if you continue to borrow money, and I've got some firsthand knowledge of this. So if you continue to borrow money to pay for stuff, eventually, if the stuff that you buy doesn't provide you the ability to turn around and sell it to get your money back, or to make your money back, you will go broke. So let's try a little experiment. If let's pretend that your credit card is the U.S. government. So we're going to do a financial experiment now. We're going to pretend that your credit card is the U.S. government, and your credit card is going to say to you can spend as much money as you want up to your credit limit, $25,000. Spend whatever you want. Just spend it. Because you know what? You need it to get by right now. You don't have a job. You don't have an income. And therefore, just use this credit card and spend how much ever you want. Because frankly, you don't have to pay us back. we're good to go. Um, well, yeah, and then so at some point you run out of that cash and you don't have anything left, right? So this credit card is saying to you, maybe says to you, okay, you don't have to pay us back. We're going to default. But by the way, you're not getting any more money from us. And in fact, you're not getting any more money from anybody else. So now your source of cash has run out of money, has run out. You have no money left. And all of a sudden, what do? Well, if you spent that credit card money, incorrectly, in other words, just to buy some goods and services and get by, and you don't have anything that you can get rid of to pay that back so you can, repair your credit or whatever, even though they're not asking you to pay it back, you're in trouble, right? What do you do going forward? You can't borrow any money. You can't borrow any more money because nobody will loan you money because you won't pay it back. Now, you can say, well, these guys didn't make me pay it back. They told me it was forgiven. I don't have to pay it back. Well, that's true. For that's true. But ultimately, you've got to have money, income, something to generate income coming in to survive. If you don't, because you aren't going to work because you had all this free money and now there's no jobs for you to work because everything's gone, the economy's gone, whatever, because everybody else did the same thing you did. And so now everything's gone. There's nothing out there. There's no money coming in and you can't borrow any more money. What happens? Well, you go bankrupt, right? As an individual, you go bankrupt. You may, if you don't find a way to work, you starve, you die. Maybe you drug overdose, maybe whatever, but all that stuff is real. That's what happens when people are desperate, when they have no future and they see no way out. People get, they have a despair and there's no alternative. That's kind of socialism, communism in a nutshell. I mean, ultimately, when it first starts, it looks great. The government's giving you free money and you don't have to pay it back. And they give it to you in a lot of stuff. They give you stimulus checks. They give you PPP loans. They give you, they give you reductions of your taxes. They give you all kinds of great things that they're going to give you. They're going to build things for you. They're going to do all kinds of things that they're going to give you. And you don't have to pay it back. So all you did was do what they said. And why not? They told you, here's a $25,000 credit card, go ahead and spend it. And we're not going to make you pay it back. But you didn't consider, nor did they, the consequences of what they're doing. At some point, you can't borrow any more money, so you can't buy things. You can't unless you pay cash. And if you don't have a job, you can't pay cash and you can't survive. So, but let's take that further. Let's say the credit card company did that. Let's say the credit card company did that for everybody. All right. So now all of a sudden they took all this money that they got from where? Where do credit card companies get their money from? Well, many of them are banks. So they got the money from the consumer. They took that consumer's deposit. And so, at that point, they may have gotten some money from there. They may have borrowed money from, on a large basis. They may have gone out there and borrowed money for, 2%, 1%, 3%, because they had great credit and they're a good company. So they borrowed money. Now what happens? Now that they've done something stupid, they've given all this money away. They go out to borrow the money or get the money from the depositors. Well, if you're a depositor in that bank and that bank has just lost, let's say, $3.6 trillion, are you going to put your money in there? And if you do, aren't you going to want some kind of assurance that you're going to get it back? And aren't you going to want a very, very high interest rate because of the risk that you're taking? Absolutely. I mean, if I'm going to do that, I want collateral. I want something hard. I want real estate, gold. I want something back in that. I want something really good back in that, so that when this dumb bank that had the bad idea of giving everybody a bunch of money away, when they go under this next time, because they will, because they are now no longer too big to fail, so they collapse. I want to make sure I get paid. So I want collateral. And you know what? Even if I got collateral, what if gold isn't worth anything? What if everything's gone away? What do I do? What do I do? Well, if I'm going to take that kind of risk, which I may not, but if I'm going to take that kind of risk, I want a 20% return on my investment, because I want to make sure that I'm making decent money. Okay, so 20% return on my investment. So I'll loan that money to this credit card company that was foolish, and I'm loaning it to them at 20%. What are they going to do? They're going to loan it out to consumers, right? Well, who are they going to loan it to? They got to loan it out at 20%. Well, the average consumer that wasn't foolish and didn't take the credit card and didn't go, that is responsible and has, has managed their debt and done all that, they're not going to pay 20% for a credit card. They're probably going to pay 12 or 15 or whatever. They're going to pay something way less. So this credit card company, what do they have to do? Well, for the good credit, they would have to loan it to them at 12. Well, they bond it at 20. They're going to lose 8% everything on every dollar they loan. They can't do that. So what do they have to do? Well, they have to go out and find the risky person that is willing to pay them more. They have to find the person who's willing to pay them a higher rate, the riskier investment, the riskier situation. So in effect, it's kind of a situation where ultimately, if the government is your credit card, or a portion of the government is your credit card, at that point, the government is going to have to find some way to come up with that money. And when they do, one of two things are going to happen. They're either going to have to declare bankruptcy. We call that a depression. So the government is either going to have to declare bankruptcy, or we're going to have to enter a period of hyperinflation. And that is hyperinflation is interest rates in excess of 100%. And you say, well, wow, Brazil, other places like that have that kind of hyperinflation, or have experienced that kind of hyperinflation. Why do they do that? Well, if we get inflation that's that high, so let's say I've got $1 and it buys $1's worth of goods. All right. So I borrow $1 to buy $1's worth of goods, right? And then now it takes $10, or let's say just make it 10. It takes $10 to buy that same $1 worth of goods. All right. It takes 10 of those dollars. That means each dollar is now worth 10 cents, is worth $1, I should say. So each dollar is worth 10 cents, is to worth tenth of it. So now, my dollar, the dollar that I originally borrowed, is now, and I bought and got $1's worth of goods. I paid for that by borrowing it. Well, that dollar is now cheaper. It's now worth only 10 cents. So today, if I can make $10, that's the equivalent of what used to be $1. So now I'm making $10. So I can now pay back with only a tenth of that. I can pay back that debt, that $1 debt that I have. I can pay it back. I'm paying it back with cheap dollars, because the dollar isn't worth as much. It won't buy as much because of inflation, because the prices of goods and services are going up so rapidly that, other things, income in particular, that's what governments base their strength on, is gross national product. So if their gross national product isn't increasing enough to keep up with that inflation, to push that inflation down. So if they're not earning more than inflation, then the value of their currency is going down. Well, we're in a worldwide, economy, so we can't control what happens. We can't control what is going on, and at some point, the dollar becomes cheaper in the world economy. It becomes cheaper, and so it's worth less when governments are trying to borrow. When the U.S. tries to borrow money, it basically has to borrow more because to cover the same expenses, because the costs of goods and services have gone up. But the advantage is the dollar goes down if we've already borrowed that money. If we borrowed that money 5 years ago, we borrowed that money 3 years ago, we borrowed it money 6 months ago. That money is now we can pay that back with cheaper dollars. So what it means is that one of the ways to try to get out of a bad economy or a bankruptcy, i.e. a depression, is to spend your way out of it and create hyperinflation. So what you do is you create a situation where everything is going up in price. It's not coming down, which is what would normally happen. As you get into a depression, your income is going down and you can't cover the debts that you already have. That's really what a depression is about. When we get to the point that we're ceasing to earn enough money in real dollars to cover all of the goods and services that we've already promised, which is retirements, which is healthcare, which is free college for all, which is, whatever we're doing. If we don't have enough income to do that, then we go broke. We have to say to all of those people that we told that we were going to give retirement and free education and all that, we have to say to them, sorry, I can't do that. You don't get it. Well, that doesn't happen. You don't take stuff away from people once you've given it to them. So, well, what do you do then? How do you make up for that? How do we recover in that situation? Well, in the short run, what you try to do is provide them with a cheaper product, and try to convince them that it's the same as what they were getting. So you provide them with, let's say you're providing them with free health care, but they've got to cover things that they wouldn't have normally had to cover. Let's say, maternity coverage when they're past the age of having kids, or abortion coverage because we decided we wanted to cover them with abortion and they're not going to get one, or whatever that health care is that they don't need, they're paying for. So what you've done is actually provided them their old health care at a higher cost, is what it amounts to. But you've given them a cheaper product. So they don't necessarily see per se the higher cost, but in effect, people are spending their money inefficiently. So they're getting a bad product for the price. And that's what you have to do. You have to convince the consumer, here, this is what I'm giving you, and it's really worth $100. But in reality, they could have gotten it before for 10 because they didn't really want it. They wouldn't have had it. And so once you skim out and you peel the banana, so to speak, by the time you get down there, they're paying way more because they paid something for the banana peel and they don't need the peel. And that's the trick. That's what you try to do. That's the process, right? We constantly try to give people free stuff that includes things that they either have to pay for that they would never buy, or they or you make it so that what they're able to get for free is a lot less robust than what you would have to pay for, and they can't get what they want, so they don't make the comparison. There's no ability to get what they had before. In other words, you downgrade it for everybody, or you have a situation where the elite or the wealthy can go get private insurance somewhere else. Now or private healthcare somewhere else. They may have to pay more money, but they don't care. because they're getting what they want, and they've got the money to do it because they've made money someplace else, probably because they've been given a monopoly on something, and they're able to make money somewhere else that they are then using to skirt the system. So what happens in that system is that as the economy starts to dip into a depression, um, in a capitalistic system, what would happen is it would go into that depression. The market would reset. In other words, the insurance products that had stuff in it that nobody wants would go away, and people would be able to buy what they want for what they want. In other words, the companies that are providing a product that nobody wants because the government potentially was subsidizing that product, or just because the government was protecting that company. Let's say that you're let's say you've got a company that produces planes, and let's say they produce jumbo jet cargo and passenger planes, but they periodically blow up and crash, right? So there's not a real solid market for that. That's a company that probably doesn't need to be around, because it's not really a good thing. There's not a real big market for planes with engines that fall off or blow up. And so therefore they would probably be one of the first to go in a depression. They would be one of the first to be gone. But wait a minute. We need them for the national defense. We need them. So we're going to support that company, and we're going to support them, and we're just going to look the other way when their engine blows up periodically, and because we need them. All right. So now they're subsidized by the government, and they're now, let's say we're got to go out and buy some planes, right? So now we need some more fighters and a couple more bombers, stealth bombers. So we go out for bids, and lo and behold, there's only two companies in the United States that are basically doing that kind of work, or three, and one of them is the company that makes the engines, the planes with the engines that fall off. Well, they're the low bidder. Why is that? Well, because they're around and they got government support for everything else. They can't go under. They can't fail because the government can't let them fail. So they've done all kinds of other stupid things and cut all kinds of other costs, and they're losing money. They don't care because they're going to get a subsidy. So now they're bidding out there against a legitimate company, maybe say like Lockheed, that's producing a decent jet that's not losing its engines. But now Lockheed has got to lower its price to meet the competition of this company whose engine's falling off. And so to do that, they're losing money potentially, or not able to make as much money. So now, what happens there? Well, they may have to sell some of their product overseas, for example, where they might be able to get more money. Now we're taking U.S. technology used in defense and we're letting it be sold overseas. Doesn't make a lot of sense, but that's what happens. So, sometimes that gets turned into other types of products, security services, private country militia, whatever, but that's what happens. So we outsource some of that, because in a communistic system, a socialistic system, or a non-free enterprise system, there tends to be you have to get support from other places, because you can't produce it yourself. So you have to get support from other places. So, you end up buying everything from China or wherever. Why are China products cheaper than ours? Because they build a better product? No, we know that, right? Right. Is it because the Chinese are much, much, much more efficient than we are? Is it because their technology is much better than ours? Nope, that's not it either. Most of that technology they stole from us to start with. So very seldom is that ever better than ours. Many, many, many times it's as good as ours because it's ours. I mean, if I compare this to this and both of them are mine and they're both made by the same company, in effect, what the heck? They're the same product, right? So if China steals my technology, sells it back to me, which I think is really kind of cool. There were people that were buying swampland and selling it to people years ago. China's perfected that process, right? I mean, they've got it down, right? Here, you got this works, this doesn't. Okay, you need to give me what works. You that don't work, you can't be here, but give me what works, and I get it, and I get to keep it. And by the way, I'm going to produce it and compete directly with you until you're out of business, and then I'm going to go steal somebody else's technology. So no, it's not because they have better technology. They have our technology. It's not because they're more efficient. They're not more efficient. Why is it? Well, it's because they have. Is it because they have a much better managed society? Absolutely. That's the reason it is. They have a much better managed society in terms of trying to produce a free market product. And I know people out there are cringing, saying, what the heck are you talking about? You're crazy. There's no way. There's no way. Think about this a minute. If you were going to function in a pure free market system and make maximum dollar, you have to maximize your resources, minimize your costs, right? That's what you have to do to be super competitive. All right. So what are the major costs in most things that China produces? Well, there's two things. It's primarily technology and, it's three things: technology, labor, and materials, right? And the materials are almost all produced in China. So, okay, so what do I do here? How do I maximize that? If I'm a pure capitalist, I want to maximize that. What do I do? Well, I'm going to use the cheapest materials I possibly can. I'm going to produce them as cost effectively as possible. So I'm going to use, if I've got labor, I'm going to run that labor 24 hours a day, and I'm going to make them work overtime with no extra pay, because I'm not giving them any extra. In fact, I may not be paying them at all. I may be giving them some goods and services, but they're not getting the goods and services that other people are getting. They're getting their share, but they're not getting any more because they're working 24 hours a day and because they're working for 2 cents an hour, right? Because I've taken the people who were out in the farm and they weren't making any money for me anyway. So I'm going to bring them in. In effect, what I'm doing is, we used to refer to them as indentured servants. Here in the United States, we tried to build our economy on the Chinese, and we were relatively successful. I think we built the railroad system based on the Chinese. What did we do? We brought them in as an indentured servants. We chained them up. We threw them in hovels, and we worked them until they either died or escaped. That's what we did, right? Well, what do you think China's doing right now? Same thing. Taking the same people. They just didn't let their people get exported. And so the U.S. could take advantage of it. They're doing the same thing to their people. They are oppressive. They are, when you make a mistake in China or Russia, you don't get demoted. If you're a general, you don't get demoted. You get killed. That's what happens. And people want to say, oh, no, that doesn't happen. Let me see. When that kid flew that plane through the Russian air defense system into Red Square and landed it in Moscow, which was an extreme embarrassment because some 15-year-old kid flew a plane under the supposedly one of the most sophisticated radar systems in the world and landed in Red Square. What happened? Well, they fixed their system. They fixed their radar system. And then they they put to death the general who was in charge of the air defense system, because that's the way it works. And in China, trust me, that's the way it works. It's coincidental that the person that exposed the coronavirus is no longer with us. Just a coincidence. So trust me, that's what happens. That's what happens there. If you buck the party, if you don't follow the line, if you don't do what you need to do, boom, we find somebody else to replace you, because there are billions of them, and they just bring in the next person, right? Now, if you're fortunate enough to be a part of the elite socialist communist, if you're a part of that, you are absolutely necessary to make this all work. So you get private care. You're taken care of. You're part of the ruling class. You're the one that gets to blame somebody else so they die, not you. And that's the goal in communism. It's the goal in China and Russia. And by the way, no country is capitalistic if or a democracy if their president is elected for life. Ain't happening. That's not the same thing. That's not a democracy. There's no free anything there. There's no free enterprise, nothing there, because when one person is elected for life, they pretty much are controlling the economy. That's the way it's going to work, because the only way that person loses their job is that the military revolts and kills them and takes it over. That's called a coup, and that has happened. And so what you have to do is you control everything when you're in that situation. So, bottom line is that so getting back to China, so China is the most effective capitalistic system possible, free enterprise system possible. And like I said, it's because we would never do that here in the United States. We now have gotten a conscious. Over the years, we've learned from our historical mistakes. We've learned from what we did to the Chinese, what we did to the Irish, what we did to the Italians, what we did to the Jews, what we did to the Japanese. We've kind of learned from that stuff. I think we've learned from what we've done to the African Americans. I think we've learned from that. I think that was a big learning process. Hopefully all of that's not going to go away so people forget. Because you know what? Socialists and communists do not care about the color of your skin. And that's a fact. They don't care about the color of your skin. Fascists might, but communists and socialists don't care about about the color of your skin. They just care about whether or not you can be used as a tool in the process so that they can have power and you don't. They don't care. In fact, the more people that they can push up and take advantage of, the better they are. The better base they have to make sure that nobody replaces them. The more dependent you are on them, the better off it is. So the communists have created this great free enterprise system. They minimize their material costs by producing faulty materials, and we've seen that, right? Toys that have got arsenic in them, and all kinds of garbage that comes out of China. Why is that? Because they produce the cheapest product they can possibly produce, and that means that if they have to use materials that are either not tested, not safe, or whatever, they don't care. They're just shoving it. They're not. It's not their people that are going to use the product anyway. They're passing this out to somebody else who's got more money than them that's buying it, right? So that's one thing they do. They produce cheap and non-qualified material, stuff that's just garbage. And then they produce cheap labor. How do they produce cheap labor? Because they determine what you can do. They determine what education you can have. Yes, everybody gets an education, but you only get an education to a certain point unless they want to educate you beyond that. Not everybody gets an education that they want. You just get a free education. Remember I said one of the successful things that communist countries do and socialist countries do is they cheapen the quality of the product. So right now we got people in the United States saying, I want a free education. I want a free education. What are they thinking? They're thinking college. They're thinking law school. They're thinking med school. They're thinking all of these kind of things. No. You'll get a free education through 12th grade, just like everybody else. We're not going to talk about that, but that's what we're going to be able to afford. Not everybody is going to get to go to the elite school that they want to go to. They're not going to get to go at all, because those schools will be reserved for those who are more capable than you. And there are people out there who are more woke, who are more enlightened, who are more capable than you. So you don't deserve to go to college, and you won't go to college because you'll waste that education on some wild idea that capitalism or democracy makes sense. And instead, you'll be replaced with someone who's woke and who understands that socialism and communism is what makes sense and that we should move towards that process. Okay? So that's what they do. So they cheapen the product. It's a bait and switch, people. That's what it is. It's a shell game. It's all of that. Here's the college education that you want. Boom, 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 boom. Oh, sorry, you didn't get it. This person over here did. But everybody had a free shot at it. Everybody had an equal chance. You all saw the shells move. Everybody had a chance to get it right. Nobody got it right. So therefore, here's the person that gets to go. So we've got a labor force that is very, very cheap. Why is it very, very cheap? Because they purposely keep it uneducated and keep it untrained. They don't provide services other than the training that that person specifically needs to be able to uh, uh, farm land. They don't give them tractors. They don't give them technology to do that. They got billions of people. They make them do stuff by hand. Is that efficient? Yes, it's efficient when your labor cost is zero. I mean, what do you care if it costs you $500,000 for a tractor to clear a field, and it costs you zero for labor, because that's basically what the communists do. It's zero for labor. Which are you going to do? I use as much labor as I possibly can. I'm not going to pay $500,000 for a tractor I don't need when I can do the same dang thing with 200,000 people. So I cheapen labor. So now I've cheapened my materials, I've cheapened labor, and I've stole my technology. So I didn't pay anything for it. So can I be competitive? You're right. China can be the most competitive country in the world because it has structured itself to be a pure free enterprise nightmare. It is the epitome of the predator competitor that we hear about. They have absolutely no labor costs, cheapest materials they can possibly get, even to the point that the materials may be defective, and they've stolen all the technology to do it. So how can you compete with that? Well, you can't. So that's why we need to wake up in the U.S. and realize that our businesses individually can never compete with a competitor like that. They can control every single aspect of their product costs. So they can price you right out of the market, and you can't compete with that. And if you participate with that, you either have to participate with what they do, which means use child labor and use whatever you're going to do, or you have to give them your technology. Thinking what? That you're going to be a partner with them? You're an idiot. Any capitalist company that does that, you're an idiot. They're going to steal it. They're going to take advantage of you. I mean, that's what they do. And they control it. They control every aspect of it. That's why they don't like any of this bad thought, this Hong Kong, Singapore thought. They don't want any of that in the mainland. They don't want any of that. In fact, it's already starting to cause a problem in Hong Kong. We got to stop that, because pretty soon people start looking at this and going, wait a minute. It is unethical to use defective products. It is unethical to beat people and use them as slaves. It is unethical to steal people's technology. And we're not going to allow that in our portion of China. Well, that ain't going to happen, because the Chinese are smart people, and the Communist Party is a smart party, and they understand how they are surviving. They are never going to reach communism. Remember, communism is a thought where everybody is equal. Everybody rules. Everybody kind of decides. It's a collective. It's a thought process that's unified, and everybody agrees to it. And all we have right now, and probably have had for the last 200 years or 100 years, however long it's been in place, about 100, probably 100 and some, is we have a group of people who are helping us move towards the collective. And so in the interim, they're kind of in charge, because they know what's necessary to get us to the good. So they know how to get us there. It's just amazing that they never go away, that those people always are in office. They never ever go away. So it's amazing. How do they gain power? How does it happen? Well, it almost always happens in some form of economic crisis. That's how it happens. Sometimes it happens in a war, but most times it happens through some sort of internal strife. Whatever kind of when you look at, for example, within China, for example, when the Muslims rose up in China for freedom, and the Chinese then suppressed that, they used that to their advantage. How did they do that? Well, they started putting them to death. You don't hear about that. You're not going to read about that, but that is what's happened. And I think the numbers are in the millions of Muslims within China. So you say, why doesn't China have a Muslim problem? Why don't they have terrorist issues? Why don't they have those things that seems like the rest of the world has been experiencing? But why? Because it's communism. They all get along, right? No, that ain't right. That's not right at all. It's because they shot him. They don't exist. They shot him. It's really easy to get along with a group of people if you eliminate them. It's much, much harder to live with them. It's a lot easier to shoot them. And that's what the Chinese did, so that's how they did it. I mean, the Russians tried to do that. They tried to do that a little bit in Syria and, Afghan and, Afghanistan and all that kind of stuff. They tried to do that, and they were relatively successful until the rest of the world caught them. And, so that's what's going on. That's how this world happens. So what happens is socialists and communists take over when we have a crisis. It could be a health crisis. It could be an economic crisis. It could be it could be a police crisis. Oh, wait a minute. All of those things happen when a socialist government takes over. Why is that? I don't know. That's coincidence, I think. I think it's a coincidence. It seems, let's see, let's look at Cuba. There was a revolution for the workers because the workers were being suppressed by Batista and those people. So we had an uprising, which was the people, which was largely the army, by the way. But the people fought back against other portions of the army that were controlled by Batista, and to liberate the people. And then they liberated them. And then what happened? Well, Castro killed the other guy that was involved in the process, who was pretty much well liked and loved and revered, and probably was a little bit more sane. He had him, well, you can't really say he was killed, that Castro had him killed. I mean, nobody can actually prove that, I don't think, because they're not alive. But let's just say that as he was at the end of the war, as he was flying back to meet Castro in Havana, his plane mysteriously disappeared and has never been found. So, geez, what happened? But anyway, so that's what happened. So what happened there? So first of all, the military. Well, what happened is that Castro, the first thing he did is took guns away from everybody. Well, first thing he did was made sure that the press was strictly controlled by him. It was not government press at that time. It was free press, but you had to have everything kind of screened, because you couldn't really just publish stuff. You had to have it screened so that it was going out and wasn't painting a picture of Cuba that was untrue, right? And so that's why we had, that's why we had Radio Free Havana or whatever it was. Because there was no free press, but it was free press supposedly, but it was all monitored. Same thing in China, same thing in Russia. You don't publish. There's not multiple news sources in any of those countries, because that would educate, and education is the antithesis of communism and socialism. You do not want the populace educated, because if they figure out the shell game that communism is or socialism is, they will they'll call a halt to it. When you realize that all you're being promised, you never can find a shell with this P in it, you will then stop. And they know that. So they got to make sure that you never understand how the game actually works. You can never see behind the curtain. You can't see that there are large portions of the government who are doing nothing but protecting those in power. You cannot see that. You cannot see that you can't have guns because you can't defend yourself. It's hilarious. I still get, I always get a big kick out of the fact that there are large blocks of people out there that think the Second Amendment was written so that we could go hunting. That's why we can have guns, so that we can go hunting. I heard somebody say, you don't need a long rifle to go out and shoot quail. You don't need you don't need that. No, I don't have a long rifle to shoot quail. I don't have an AK-47 to shoot quail. I have an AK-47 to shoot the government when they come to get me. That's why I have an AK-47. you should be able to have a Stinger missile. You should be able to have a tank. I mean, the whole purpose of the Second Amendment was to keep the government from overrunning the population. And that's the way they do it in a communist country, in a socialist country. You take away all the guns. When I went to Cuba, I wasn't afraid of getting shot. I would go anywhere. I wasn't afraid of getting shot. I might have gotten stabbed, but I wouldn't have been afraid of getting shot anywhere. Why? Nobody has a gun. Nobody would be stupid enough to have a gun. We could stop all the gun violence in Chicago. We've got a law in Chicago that says you can't have a gun. Okay? If we had a law in Chicago that says you can't have a gun and we're going to shoot you if you've got one, no questions asked, I guarantee you gun violence in Chicago will go away. Cuba is very safe because the only person that has a gun is the government. Now, they have machine guns. So, they stand there with machine guns. So I'm very, very afraid of them, but I was not afraid of having anybody on the street shoot me. That ain't happening because you control the military. You control the press. You control the military. You agitate or aggravate an existing hurt or an existing inequity in the government, in the economy, whether it's race, whether it's economy, whether it's economic, the ability to work, whether it's the ability to have health care, whatever. You aggravate that. You provide an alternative that the people are not smart enough to catch the shell game. They buy into it. Next thing you know, you're in office. You eliminate all your competition. There are no longer two parties or three parties. There are no longer free press. Why would you need more than one party? We've already got the person that knows everything and does everything, because the press is going to tell you that they know everything and do everything, because the press is covered and protected by that government. So the bottom line is that's what we have to be afraid of. We have to be afraid of that type of process. And trust me, people, it is happening today. And so we need to look at that and see what we're going to do. Okay? It is happening. So be aware of it and pay attention, because your freedom is easy to lose. Don't lose it because you can't get it back. All right. Well, thanks for listening this morning. Hopefully it made you think, and we'll be back next week right here on WSTU Digital 1450, Martin County's Heritage Station.